Welcome back. Welcome to Section 2. I hope you enjoyed Section 1. Kind of get the bigger picture of ethics as we understand it from Western terms and the terminologies that we use in the English language. So let's take a we're going to take the next step in Section 2, and this is going to be an overview of some of the ethics as it relates to medicine from a more Eastern perspective. It was a little bit harder to compile materials for this section. We looked through some historical books, and we looked on Wikipedia, and we drew from our own personal knowledge to hopefully give you a general base of ethics from an Eastern perspective. So what I would say with ethics from an Eastern perspective is it's important to understand the Chinese word of day. Um, it is spelled D-E, that's in the current Pinyin translation. And in the previous translation, the Wade Giles, it would have been a T-E. Sometimes I've seen a T-E-H. I'm not sure which it was in there. But Dao De Jing. It's the day from Dao De Jing. And what it tends to be translated as virtue. As with any Chinese translations, it's a little simplistic to take one word to fully define a Chinese character. It just doesn't really work that way. I think other authors have tried to do that, and I would have to say that it was important that they did that, but I would say ultimately they didn't fail, but our profession can't adopt what they did as the way we go about things. So Chinese words will need to be using different English translations all the time. It's a necessary aspect to it. And as a text that I was recently looking at said, let's say with the word shen, which means spirit or mind, for Chinese people or for Chinese speakers or in the Chinese language, it doesn't sometimes mean spirit and sometimes means mind. It always means both. But as an English translator, we're going to have to choose different ones for different contexts. So there's a richness in the Chinese language that I think is very relevant for English speakers. We have a very linear, awesome language, like all languages really carry truth with them. But taking something like these Eastern languages that are character-based really helps us grow in our sense of the relativity of meaning and the multiplicity of meaning. Things that I feel as we move into this quantum age are going to be are becoming more natural. So we already have a natural expression of that in the Chinese language. So with this word day, it could mean virtue, it can mean character, it can mean integrity, and also it can mean a bit more of a spiritual like storehouse of energy, that you've built up this upright energy and it will work to your benefit when you go to do good in the world, and medicine would be one of those things. So cultivating this storehouse, this character that tends to have with it credits, and it's kind of like makes me think of Buddhism in a very superficial sense, where you have good karma, you have built up good karma. And I do believe that it's that action-reaction, that we start becoming more positive in all aspects of ourselves, and the world becomes a bit more of a mirror for that, and that can benefit us in the treatment room, ethically, and in our lives. So Day is going to be the foundation of ethics in Chinese medicine. So in this chapter, you'll see written definitions from a bunch of different authors and different perspectives, from the more mystical to the more pragmatic. So suffice it to say, we are going to at least want to think of Day as our character, and sometimes our character is innate, and sometimes it's about accepting our character. If we're constantly beating ourselves up for our character, or if we're constantly in denial or repression of the fact that we have some of these autopilot settings that we don't find desirable and we just want to hide them, a lot of times as we hide and repress material, again, it comes out as projection. So the best thing that we can do is get to know ourselves, and my strong recommendation, is to be compassionate with yourself as you go on this journey, because being in denial of yourself is never going to be the solution. And there's always room for improvement. So again, there's a sense of that in the moment we are enough as we are. I just heard this in a song, that in our Maker's eyes, we are already enough. So in the moment, we want to have that sense of self-love and self-acceptance so that we can extend acceptance to others. If we judge ourselves, we are going to inevitably judge others. And not that we can truly ever get away from judgment. It's kind of a survival mechanism. It helps us understand good and bad, right and wrong, safe and unsafe. It's part of the I Ching mechanism to some extent. The more we identify with it, though, the more we are just functioning from survival and unexamined ego. So we will look at Day. And then we're looking at a history of ethics in China, and in general, this is kind of what we have is that we have the ancient Wu, that's the name for the shamans. In the character in Chinese has two shamans dancing to bring the rain. So really, like in most cultures, we go back into the primordia of history and medicine and religion and mythology and daily life. Were all one. Things were not so deeply defined as they are now. They weren't so deeply differentiated. Some of the stuff we'll never really know because it's sort of it's lost to the prehistoric, prehistory times, the pre-written record. But there are oral traditions, and I feel like in humanity we do carry this non-written record with us just by nature of being alive. So we can't prove what they thought back then, but we can gain deep insight into it. It's in our DNA. It's in the collective memories that we are starting to understand more about psychologically. So out of this antiquity, out of this primordial mystery, we begin having the written record. And it's interesting, by some of the first written records, the I Ching was one of the first written records ever, where it emerged out of rune stones and throwing turtle shells as oracles into the fire and reading the cracks that came out on them. And it comes from legends of turtles rising out of the river with these numerical inscriptions that help us have a template for the 10,000 things through through the Bagua, the 8 directions, 8 trigrams, which we'll discuss more, and how they become the 64 hexagrams. So that is an old, continuous lineage, the I Ching, and it's been added to with archetypal information, from deep intuition, and also as cultural history progresses, we get to just more and more wisdom added onto it, and we can add our own wisdom onto it, and that's where it gets some of its richness. But in this section 2, we are focused more on the idea that that medicine grew out of antiquity, and then the Wang Di Neijing, some of these books that were written already described that humans had come a long way from being in health and harmony with nature by the time these were written. And these were written, in centuries BC. But at the same time, we had a strong philosophical Chinese medical structure in there. We had the 5 elements. We have these acupuncture channels have already been mapped and almost forgotten. It's like they're already trying to write these down before they are forgotten. And this is back in the days of BC. So within this structure, most of it is a evolution of political history. That's kind of with the written history. And you'll have Confucian scholars, you have itinerant doctors, so you have folk medicine and more medicine of the establishment. And then as the establishment and the empires and the dynasties get a little bit stronger, they tend to adopt Confucian doctrines. And Confucian doctrines tend to be more about your social code, how you behave with others. They're not so much about deep reflection, even though Confucius is always suggesting that, but it's really about, can we be polite and can we be, we're going to put others before ourselves. So these become things that the state can always stand behind. It's a little bit more easy to manage the people when we're saying that what we do for society is more important than what we do for ourselves. I mean, I don't mean to say it in a crass way or anything, but the state tends to adopt Confucian models. Now, Buddhist models sometimes are a bit more religious, so they sometimes are a little bit harder for the state to serve the state. But there'll be times when Buddhism is strongly in fashion, and I found out while studying this that hospitals were the first constant, state-run hospitals grew out of Buddhism. So it's pretty cool that this religion that's so based on compassion, helped us get those first hospitals. And then Taoism is always a theme because the shamanic themes tend to be more Taoist. Taoism seems to have kept a little bit more of that mystical, magical, animistic aspect, and so they were often out of vogue. The Taoists don't tend to really function well as social servants or being paid by the state. But they always do go counsel the emperor. They always try to provide service, but it's not one where they can just accept an external code and written values and sort of maybe sell out some of their integrity for political purposes. That seems to be the thing that they don't do. And again, more so than Confucianism, we have Buddhism and Taoism. You'll have monks. So you also have these religious orders that are training and doing deep, extensive trainings outside of the state. So you're going to start having these Confucian scholars that do medicine. You have these Buddhist monks that do their version of medicine, and you have Taoist monks that do their version of medicine. So So what we have there is some of these factions will go in and out of vogue. Almost it'll be illegal for Taoism and Buddhism to function at different times, and eventually we hit this sort of culmination, this moment where Sun Si Miao, sort of the patron saint of medicine, he wrote a treatise on ethics, and it's been adopted as this oath that. For practitioners of Chinese medicine. And Sun Si Miao is a very interesting personage, and he is a he identifies with himself as a Taoist, a deep Taoist training, but he uses a lot of Buddhist terms as well. So he was no stranger to Buddhism, and then when he does a lot of his writings, he will present them in Confucianist terms. So he was an expert in demonology and very mystical Taoist stuff. It seems like all mystical Taoist stuff. Sun Si Miao understood this, but he also understood that it was tricky when you put potentially superstitious concepts into writing and they get dogmatized. So when he wrote these guidelines for future doctors, he left out the mystical aspects, and he really went for something that can be accepted universally. And from looking at the reading, he appears to have been at the same time that the first imperial physician training schools were coming in. And it seems to me like he recognized this pivotal moment where he could help guide medicine now that it was going into these more university type structures. So we can look through that in section 2, and we will see you again in the next video section. Thank you.